Welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. If you struggle with food and weight like I did, welcome home. Hi, and welcome to the Heal Your Hunger Show, where we help you get to the heart of why you overeat and how to stop. I'm Tricia Nelson, your host, and I'm really excited that you tuned in today. This is the very first episode of this show, and it's an important one, of course, because it's the first, and also because I'm going to share with you how Heal Your Hunger came about, my story essentially. So here we go. I grew up in the Northeast and in Concord, and I had a great home. My parents were happily married and good parents. I will say that it was the 60s, so there wasn't a whole lot of getting in touch with one's emotions going on. So, we were doing the best we could, and my parents certainly did the best they could. But we grew up certainly as people who love to eat. My parents were overweight as kids, so they had some issues with weight that I'm sure got a little bit projected on my sisters and myself. Basically, as they got older, they lost weight. They went on the Pritikin diet, if you remember that, in the 80s. They went on the Pritikin diet and lost weight. They cut all the fat out. That was the rave back then. And they lost weight. It worked. And so they were thin ever, from that point on. However, they had their own issues. My mom was certainly very concerned about having her kids not get fat, whether that came from her own neuroses or just caring about us and knowing that that wouldn't be a good experience for us. I don't know. But nobody could keep me from being fat. I was a fat kid. I was obsessed with food from the get-go at age 3, as far back as I can remember, which goes back, I think, to 3, maybe 4. Food was a big highlight for me. Boy, oh boy, I loved to eat. I loved food. And of course, I wasn't in love with salads. I was in love with the ooey gooey chewy foods, the brownies and the cookies and the ice cream and anything sweet. I was definitely a sugar addict from the get-go. So sugar just, had me a hello. So basically, I grew up with a weight problem. I was chubby as a kid, and, I had the physical propensity to gain weight. I'm sure I got that, I got the genes from my parents because they had been overweight when they were younger. So I gained weight very easily at a slow metabolism, and I was pretty much a chubby kid. Funny thing is, when I look back at photos, I wasn't always chubby. As in my mind I was, but I call that fat head, when we think we're fat, but we're really not. So I had fat head. So sometimes I look back at photos, and at certain points in my childhood, I was pretty normal size-wise, but boy, oh boy, I felt fat, and I was certainly obsessed with food. So overall, though, especially when I got into adolescence and hit the 6th grade, perhaps maybe age 12 or so, I started really spiking in my weight. And of course, the hormones, the sexuality, all that stuff added to that, added fuel to the fire. But growing up, I really was obsessed with food, and food was a highlight for me. Anytime my family was going out to dinner, I get all excited, like all day. I'd just be thinking about that rusty scupper we'd go to, or I got to eat steak and baked potato. And, I liked salads if they were drenched in blue cheese dressing and croutons. But it wasn't the lettuce I was after. But anyway, I was really excitable when it came to food. And so I loved dessert. I loved it when we went out for ice cream. I mean, all those things. And of course, most kids do. But as I got older, I started to realize that I wasn't most kids. I mean, I'd go out to Friendly's, which was a local burger place, or it's like a Denny's or IHOP or whatever. But I go to Friendly's with my friends after school, and they'd order, a sandwich and fries, or a burger and fries. And they'd eat their sandwich or burger, and they'd pick at their fries. And I'd be sitting there my fries were gone, and I'd be thinking, how can they pick at their fries? Like, why would anybody do that? The fries are the best part, right? So, you know, I thought there's something strange about me. Like, I'm not the same as my friends. They'd order a hot fudge sundae and they'd eat, and, you know, the spoon would go down to the bottom, but they'd get bored and they'd eat only half. They'd leave half of it there. And I'll tell you, I never left any bit of ice cream in any bowl I ever had. So I always ate everything. If it was ooey gooey and chewy, if it was sugar, fat, and starch, my 3 favorite food groups. So that's how it went for me. And of course, you know, I had the body to show it. I was fat, and I had this roll on my tummy that, and honestly, I still have a roll. It's just how my body's made, no matter what my weight is. But it was bigger when I was bigger, and I'd scrunch it up in my hand, and I'd want to cut it off. Like, I'd think, I hate this roll so much. And sometimes when we would have steak, when we were vacationing, and my dad would cook steak on the grill, and basically there would be like a line of fat on the steak, and he'd slice it off and gnaw on it. He liked the fat, and then we'd sort of fight over getting to gnaw on that fat, he and I. But anyway, my point is that he would slice off the fat on the steak. And so I thought to myself, well, if this roll on my tummy is just fat, I could cut it just like you do fat on a steak. Thank God I never tried that. It would have been really bad. But the point is, that's like how drastic I was. I mean, that's how kind of out there I was, thinking about my weight and food and how to like solve the situation. I even thought about getting a disease. I fantasized about getting a disease where I'd like automatically get sick or get sickly, and I'd lose weight and I wouldn't basically have to do anything. I thought about joining the army, where they'd make me go to boot camp and exercise, you know, heavily, and so I'd automatically lose weight that way. I wasn't going to exercise on my own. I hated exercise. You know, I was overweight. I was chubby. My legs would chafe. I mean, who wants to do that? So anyway, the point is, violent things, I mean, violent, drastic measures are what I thought about resorting to. And my experience is that's true for people who struggle with their weight. Is, you know, over time, we get more and more desperate, and we're willing to do more and more crazy things. And if you're watching, you may have experienced that. So anyway, when I say watching, because this is a video recorded by video, so you may be watching on YouTube, but perhaps you're listening by iTunes and podcasting. So either way, I appreciate your tuning in. Anyway, so when I got into high school, I started to think about what I could do about my weight. So I did start to diet. Dieting was a lost cause for me because I get so hungry and I just wanted to stop dieting and eat again. And so I'd last maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. I remember I was a nanny for a family up in Cape Cod. And that I was a freshman in, or maybe sophomore in high school. And that summer, I was really making an effort to lose weight. And I tried hard, and I jogged, and I ate salads with tuna fish and cottage cheese, and I was really going for it, you know, trying to slim down. But you know, that entire summer, my weight fluctuated between 155 and 150 pounds. Like, that's it, 5 pounds up and down, up and down. I couldn't do any better than that, and I'm 5'6", so I was definitely a fat girl by then, and it was so frustrating. But you know, it wasn't like something wrong with my body. I just couldn't really not overeat. I mean, I'd have extra mayonnaise on my tuna fish salad when I was making cake or something for the family. I'd be licking the bowl. I'd be taking a spoon here and a spoon there. So in my mind, I was doing good, but I wasn't. You know, I was still grabbing food wherever I could, sneaking food, or even thinking I'm doing good, but always eating more than my body physically needed. And the bottom line is, I did that because I needed that food. I needed the excess fat, that mayonnaise, that scoop of mayonnaise. I needed that. I needed my food to be tasty. I needed to really indulge myself because food was so much more to me than nourishment. I was an emotional eater, and I didn't know that. I did not even know what that concept was. And I think back then those words didn't even exist. But the point is, that's what I was doing. I was emotionally eating. I had stress, I had pain, I had nervousness, I had low self-esteem, a lot of things that were really fertile in a fertile environment for overeating. Anyway, I continued on in high school to eat, and I also started to drink in high school. I was like an instant alcoholic, just add alcohol. I was a blackout drinker from the beginning, so when I'd drink, I'd forget what I did that night. I'd have to have my friends tell me. I had no idea there was anything odd or strange about that. I thought that's what happened when you drink, because it always happened to me. Not every single time, but I'd say probably 80% of the time. I also was very promiscuous when I drank, and that was pretty embarrassing for me because, I ended up with people I would never have been caught dead with had I been sober. So I started to realize that there was this alter ego inside of me that was frightening. I grew up in a very straight-laced home, religious home, where you don't have sex till you're married. And, I was throwing that idea out the window. And I really, I was really like a Jekyll and Hyde. It was really embarrassing for me. I'd learn about what I'd done or who I'd done it with. And I just thought, wow, who is this person? And the thing is, and I'm grateful for this today, I knew that I couldn't blame my behavior on alcohol. It wasn't like alcohol made me do it. I knew in my heart of hearts that was me. That was Tricia coming out uninhibited. And so this nymphomaniac that I seemed to be, I knew in my heart that's who I was. And it terrified me because it's not who I was raised to be. It's not who I really wanted to be. But I couldn't help myself when I drank, when I didn't have any guard up. And so I ate and drank throughout high school, and I was fat, and I was pretty unattractive. And I was, by the end of my high school, by senior year, I got the nickname Trish the Fish, which I think is really funny. But but at the time, I was a little bit embarrassed. Of course, I liked the attention. It was kind of cute, but at the same time, I was pretty out of control, basically, to get that kind of name. I was suspended from school on account of my drinking and some shenanigans I pulled on account of drinking and planning a big party that a whole lot of people were involved in and a whole lot of us got in trouble for. So I was out of control sexually, with alcohol, with food, with fear. Oh my goodness, I had so much fear. I was terrified. I was such a fearful person. And the crazy thing is, you would never know it. I mean, seriously, you would never know it because I did courageous things. I was goalie for lacrosse and field hockey and sports. First of all, I did sports when I didn't even want to. I went to a high school where we had to do sports. It was not optional, and we had to go to school on Saturdays too, to boot. That was pretty crappy. But anyway, I was on the field every day and in the games, and the pressure was on. So being a goalie is a lot of pressure, and true to form, I would binge before every single game, especially with lacrosse because it was so painful. Being a goalie for lacrosse, you have these hard balls being pelted at you, and it hurts like crazy. I had the worst bruises ever on the inside of my thighs and on any place where the padding wasn't. I had these dark black and blue marks. So it was scary for me, Why was I doing it? I could have played a field position because I was loco, like I was really crazy. But there were reasons, like I got more attention. I got to be singled out. I didn't have to run as much because I didn't want to run. Being as fat as I was, it was hard to run. I was somewhat asthmatic, so I'd sweat and I'd just sort of limp across the field, but if I had to run. So if I just stood in the goal, I got out of running. So, this eating disorder that I had, this food addiction personality that I had, called the shots. I stood in that goal and took the pain, and I cried many days because it was so painful. And I did all that just so I didn't have to run because I was fat and I was lazy. I didn't want to run. I hated to exercise. So anyway, what happened was, I was just saying that I would binge before each game because I was so terrified of the pressure of standing there and it was scary. Some of these girls, boy, they were real jocks. I was not a real jock, but they were serious jocks and they were scary. So I would binge on macaroni and cheese and tater tots and French fries, which they seemed to, it was no coincidence. On game days, they'd feed us as much starch as possible to give us that quick energy for our games. Boy, did I take advantage of that. So I'd have these big plates and I really would binge till I was stuffed. And then I'd waddle out on the field and stand in the goal and hope that I could stop some balls. I did, actually. I was a pretty good goalie. But anyway, the point is, fear was a big thing for me and I was really afraid. And yet I was courageous playing goalie. I was president of my school. I was kind of a leader type. So I was into school politics and I was president of my school. I was president of my junior class and junior in high school. So, I did theater. I loved to perform. So lots of things that would indicate I was really courageous and strong, but inside I was trembling all the time. Life seemed so daunting to me. Every paper I had to write, every test I had to take, every boy I talked to, I was afraid, and food was my backup. That's what bolstered me, food and alcohol, but food is my first love, of course. So I'd be bolstered by food all the time, stuffed all the time, just so I didn't feel the fear. Of course, none of that was conscious. It's only in hindsight. But anyway, I went to college and I pretty much, it was the same as it had been before, eating, drinking, being promiscuous, being out of control, procrastinating on the papers I had to write, but always pulling it together. Always pulled it together. I got decent grades. I went to a really good college somehow and managed to get by, but never without that fear, never without that low self-esteem, never that, that lack of self-respect that put me in bad situations with people, humiliating situations, especially when I was drinking. So that's how it went for me. I finally really, that the psychological and emotional and spiritual darkness was really coming upon me more and more in college, and I wanted to take time off, so I did. I took time off from college. My sisters had done the same thing. I was like, I needed a time out so that I could get myself together and really sort of find myself. That was, I think, a big thing in the 80s, at least. I'm sure it is now too, but those words, find myself. I took time off from college and I moved to Seattle, and there I worked at the Seattle Art Museum, and I started going to therapy. I went to an eating disorders therapist. I was going to a 12-step program. I'd already been in a 12-step program for about a year for overeaters. And I was doing retreats, and I was reading self-help books, and I was weighing and measuring my food. I was on this food plan, and I started to lose weight. And I have to tell you that my weight loss journey at the time was great on the one hand and really insane on the other, because I was, I had the obsession with my weight and losing weight. That replaced my obsession with food and eating food. So I just swapped one for the other. And as I lost weight and I got kudos from other people, I got super self-obsessed, and I would shop and buy these clothes that I could finally fit into. It was remarkable to me to lose weight and all of a sudden look in the mirror and see a thinner person. But I will tell you, I could not handle the weight loss. It was, what was coming up for me was lots of feelings that I didn't know how to deal with. And I didn't even know where there were feelings. I was so disconnected from myself. But anyway, like I'd shop a lot, and I got to the point where I was wearing like 3 outfits a day when I reached my goal weight. I couldn't get enough of self, my obsession with self, because I was trying to replace, I had a void when I stopped overeating that I needed to fill with something else. And because I was so focused on losing weight only and nothing more substantial than that, I was filling myself with other crazy obsessions. So obsession with clothes, obsession with boys. Oh my goodness. I was really crazy, practically stalking some boys that I had crushes on. I went out with a guy who was totally not right for me, but I made him out to be great. In my mind, I cooked up who he was. He was my knight in shining armor. So I was really, again, I was thin, but I wasn't well. And I wasn't well because I had just focused on diet and weight loss and food plans and exercise. And I'll tell you, I crashed. I really crashed. And the time came when I was going to put the weight back on, because I always did. I always put the weight back on once I reached my goal weight, because I couldn't take the crazy. I really couldn't take the thoughts, the depression. I had a lot of depression. And back then, depression wasn't it wasn't even a word that people threw around much. This is in the 80s. I'm totally dating myself, but this is, depression wasn't, I think in the 90s, it really started to get popular, and they started handing out Prozac, like candy. But back then, I didn't even know what depression was. My therapist didn't know I was depressed. I just kept saying I don't feel right. And she's like, oh, well, you're just adjusting to your new self. Well, the truth is, I was depressed. I had a lot of feelings that were completely unaddressed that I didn't know how to deal with. And so I started to overeat. And it was so terrifying to me because I was really young. And I thought to myself, I cannot do this for the rest of my life. I can't go up and down the scale a million times. It's so bad for my body. It's so frustrating. It's discouraging. But that's pretty much what I'm looking at as a future. So either that or just resign myself to being fat. And what happened was I really started to despair, because when you're in a 12-step program, they're like, this is the last house on the block. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, if it's the last house on the block, I'm completely screwed because it's not working for me. And I was with an eating disorders therapist, and that wasn't working for me. So I was in despair. And what happened was, by the grace of God, and I believe God heard my prayer, I was in a meeting, and I had seen a gal there was a gal leading the meeting who was bulimic, hopelessly bulimic, hopelessly. She'd been morbidly obese. She'd lost the weight, and she was fighting to keep it off. So of course she was overeating again, and she had to do whatever she could. So she turned to bulimia. She started binging and purging to try to mitigate the effects of her binges, basically. So she started binging and purging, and it took on a life of its own, which it will. Any addiction will get away from us and take over. So she was hopelessly bulimic, and nobody could help her. She had a million sponsors. Nobody could help her stop. And what happened was I went to a meeting, and, usually when she would share, people would get kind of uncomfortable or get up to go to the bathroom or, just sort of brace themselves, because her shares were so hopeless and so dark and so sad, because she could not stop and nobody could help her. Nothing was working for her. But this time she was leading the meeting, and she said, I haven't had the desire to binge and purge in 2 weeks. It's been lifted from me. And I looked at her, and she was different. She was composed. She was strong. She wasn't whiny and sad. She was strong and confident, and there was so much healing all around her. And I just thought to myself, what in God's name happened to her? Like, what happened? I couldn't believe it. I had never seen anything like it. I mean, such a transformation in such a short period of time, especially. So anyway, I'm just scraping the bottom myself. And the next couple days, some other things happened. I ran into a gal who had, I heard another gal actually at a meeting who had the same type of transformation. She was so different. And she said, you know what, I know what to do. I'm a good student. I always do everything right. But I've never surrendered. And the way she talked, it just hit me between my eyes. And I thought, I've never surrendered. I'm sitting here trying to be in control. She was just so different and strong. And there was such clarity in her voice. And anyway, I ran into her. I was doing anything I could, and I showed up at church the next day looking for answers, and I ran into her, and I said, what's going on with you? Like, there's something different about you. And she said, oh, I'm working with this guy, Roy. And I knew who she was talking about because I had heard him speak, and I had cried the whole time he spoke. I was very touched by him. And then she said that this other gal, the one who had been hopelessly bulimic, was working with him too. And that's all I needed to hear. The two of them, I had witnessed miracles in their lives. I had seen it with my own eyes. And I thought, if they're both working with this guy, Roy, I got to work with this guy, Roy. And I went home. I got his number from her, and I went home and I called him literally as soon as I walked in the door. We did not have cell phones back then, so as soon as I got home, I called him, and I met with him, and I began to work with him as a mentor, a spiritual mentor. And I'll tell you, my life has never been the same since. And that sounds kind of corny and dramatic, but it's the absolute truth. My life has never been the same since. He completely turned everything around for me. First of all, by telling me that my life, but that my problems aren't about food and weight, that food is not my problem, and that life is. And he began to show me how to cope with life in a whole new way, how to orient myself to life and my decisions in a whole new way, in a spiritual way, and really help me to clear out the things that were blocking me from God, from my relationship with God, which I wanted a strong relationship with a higher power, but I didn't know how to get there. I wasn't religious, and I really turned off to that whole idea, but I knew I needed something, but I couldn't get there. There was no way to make that connection happen, but that's what he showed me how to do. So, that's what happened for me, and I witnessed him working with other people, and I saw the changes over and over that happened in other people's lives as well as mine. And I just said, I want to help you. I want to be a part of this. I want to help people get to you. And that was a whole lot of years ago, close to 3 decades ago, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So Heal Your Hunger is really about bringing this information. Roy only works one-on-one with a person. It's a very deep dive, emotional healing, spiritual healing experience. And so he works only one-on-one with people in Los Angeles. That's it. He knows the results he can practically guarantee if people work with him in person, and that results are absolute freedom from their obsessions and compulsions, whatever the addictions are. It doesn't have to be food, but certainly I've watched over and over people meet with him once and have their obsession with food lifted, where they can't overeat even if they wanted to. So, but it is a healing process he takes them through over a 28-day period. But Heal Your Hunger is really about taking the information that I've learned from watching Roy work, from being a part of his work and helping others. We've been working together to help people heal for, as I said, close to 30 years. So I've seen it all. And I've heard such amazing things, come out of Roy's mouth. And I've learned so much. And so many other people have, but because he only works with one person at a time in person, it's, not everybody can access that. If you can, I hope you will. But for those who can't, Heal Your Hunger is really a way for me to bring this information, this vital information to you, so that you can really stop focusing on food and weight and start looking at the real issues. And I'm going to be talking all about that here at Heal Your Hunger with this show, all about what really drives us to overeat. And it's not because you know, your mom fed you pastries as a kid. Now you just love pastries because it comforts you. It goes so much deeper than that. I mean, it's not the usual stuff that you hear about or read about. It's a lot deeper. It's a little more gnarly, or maybe a lot more gnarly, but I'm going to flesh it out with you, and show by show, we're going to dig in. So I hope you'll join me for this journey. I hope you'll be a part of it. You know, there's a lot of good stuff ahead, and so much information and so much healing, because I find that emotional eaters are terribly misunderstood. People do not understand what drives us to eat. I mean, they give us really silly solutions, like, you know, you have to just moderate, like, no shit, Sherlock. Sorry, I think I'm going to be swearing on this show. I mean, really moderate. Like, tell me something I don't know. So they tell us things. They're good-meaning people, doctors and therapists and, you know, parents and friends. I mean, they tell us things hoping to be helpful, but truthfully, it's not their fault. They can't understand what we've been through because they haven't been through it. Only somebody who's stared at a cookie and cried because you want it so bad and you so don't want to eat it because you know what's going to happen. Only somebody who's been through that is going to understand this problem. And only somebody who's overcome this themselves can really understand how to overcome it. So that's really what I'm here to do, is help you and guide you. So I hope you'll join me on this journey. I've got some amazing guests who are going to be joining me. Some of them will totally get it and understand what emotional eating is all about. Some of them won't, but they'll have great health information to share that I want you to have to help you and sort of fill in some of the blanks when you're struggling, because our bodies are very sensitive. So we need this vital health information to assist us on our healing path. So please join me. Please subscribe and tell your friends, and let's take this journey together. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to my story. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed this podcast and want to get free support, insider health info, exclusive invites to events, and more, visit healyourhunger.com.